Good evening and welcome to the sixth episode of A Day in the Life. Ask Our Architects Anything. My name is Mike Wilson. I am the Executive Director of AIA East Bay, and tonight we have Brian Stryzek with us. Brian is a board member at the AIA East Bay, and beyond me making an introduction for him, I'd like to welcome him and let him tell you about himself. Brian?
Thanks, Mike. It's a great opportunity to be able to synthesize what I've done in my career and kind of looking back at it through this presentation. So I appreciate you asking me and having the opportunity to do that. I grew up outside Chicago, 30 miles south of downtown Chicago in a town called Park Forest. It was a suburb that was started after World War II. Urbanistically, it's interesting looking back at it now because it had these three zones in it. They had apartment housing that was built first for these troops that came back and their families. They had these starter houses that were kind of on the outskirts, and then these mid-income housing, which is what ultimately my family went through all three of those to where I grew up. So I also had this amazing connection to downtown Chicago through the Metro line, which brought computers back and forth from Chicago. And then lastly, just the central core of the city with all these different housing types around it. Had a mall, had a library, had all of its services, so everyone had this kind of unifying place to hang out at. So then just this opportunity of going back and forth from Chicago, it was always a place where we'd go and shop and just explore around. And, Chicago is a museum for modern architecture and modern skyscrapers. So it was a great opportunity to be able to experience these things. My parents' story was at the Marshall Fields building here on the right-hand side of the image. Just when I was young, we were there during lunch, and I just couldn't get my eyes off the Tiffany glass in the ceiling. And it was the quality of space, it was the shimmer of it, it was people going around, and I guess I made a big shriek and pointed up and stopped everyone passing through this little auditorium space. And my parents at that point thought, okay, he's interested in architecture. After that, after leaving Chicago, I went to a school for a couple of years, and then finally ended up in the University of Kentucky in Lexington, Kentucky. Not necessarily in a mecca of architecture, but an immensely interesting place. With Lexington being a pretty good sized city, about the size of Oakland, with an old central core. They had parks there that had Confederate and Union soldiers on both sides of the park. So really interesting from a historical standpoint. But then as the city grew, it kind of grew out in these circles, kind of like Paris, where you had these kind of looping roads that went around. And ultimately, as you worked your way out, you went from the central core to kind of 60s suburbia out to that kind of darker ring, which was kind of the 90s development. And then ultimately it bled out into this beautiful countryside of horse farms, which brought in these immensely eclectic people from all around the world to raise horses. So I just got really inspired by barns, as a lot of people I think do when they drive around countrysides and are architects. And just watching these landscapes kind of pass through these barns and these open spaces that happen and the slots, it's just really kind of sacred spaces that these pretty simple buildings create.
Brian, is this tobacco hanging?
It is tobacco. It was interesting. I worked after I graduated from college, I was an assistant golf pro at a golf course that was the largest, I guess is the biggest tobacco grower in Kentucky. So this guy, he had all this land and he decided to make a golf course, and that's where I ended up after college for a while. And I always wanted to pick the tobacco, but he would never let me go out there. He said, that's not work for you. You're not the right type of person for that. So
No.
I guess it just stings and just gets into your skin. And yeah, that's exactly what that is.
Interesting. I didn't realize you were a golfer.
I am, or was. So during school, I had the opportunity to do a couple things. Doing internships, which were really pretty interesting. I worked with Peter Eisman working on the Cardinal Stadium. I did little models for him for carrying his model. So I made like suitcases out of cardboard for him so he could carry it. I worked for Daniel Libeskind when I was doing my study abroad program in Turkey and Berlin. And then David Biaggi, who was a local Kentucky architect who was one of the first 40 best architects under 40 years old. And I would recommend anyone in looking for opportunities to learn and to advance their interests to do either one of these or do both of them. Find small internships at great architects firms and travel abroad when you can.
So what did you find when you were coming out of college? It looks like you had a really good opportunity for traveling abroad. Was that a program out of your university that you participated in?
It was, yeah. So we did, we had like a yearly program in Venice, and then we had this special program that was at Turkey, Berlin, which I don't think they did it after us. I think we were the last ones and first ones. And it was a professor who was best friends with this famous architect named Daniel Libeskind. So I think he wanted an opportunity to be able to see his friend and hang out, and just thought it'd be fun to travel. Berlin is the second largest Turkish city as far as population goes. So it's this interesting connection that we started off in Turkey, did a trip around and saw Ephesus, Cappadocia, which is a carved cave dwellings, and then back through Istanbul. So it was, and then we went to this really modern city that was developing. It was 92, I guess, when I was there. So the wall had come down in Berlin, and things were just starting to boom, much like San Francisco is right now. Just lots of cranes, lots of development, which was really interesting.
So it doesn't matter really where you go to school, because you ended up with quite an exotic experience there.
That is true. Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. I guess it's just the opportunity of what schools give those opportunities. So I think that just the idea of just being there for so long and having a project of an academic project to think about these places where you're at is good, because you can just travel and then you end up at the beach and drinking Mai Tais. When you're studying, it's a different atmosphere. You're actually really thinking about what you're doing. You're sketching a lot. I just think it's a different mindset than vacationing.
So would you say that that's something you'd recommend for students and potential architects to put themselves in a position to travel abroad with some kind of architectural emphasis?
I think it'd be great. Yeah, absolutely. I know there's like a lot of Cal students who come abroad to here, which I guess maybe you can think of that as being an experience of traveling abroad, living in California. But yes, if you don't have those kind of opportunities, yeah, I think it's really a really key thing, and I strongly recommend it. It's interesting, like after studying abroad, so the connection to Daniel Libeskind was what I was trying to get a job after college to go back to Daniel Libeskind's office, and it took me, I kept calling, and finally got a hold of his business partner, and she said, "Can you be here this week?" And I was like, "No, I can't. I can't move to Berlin from Chicago to Berlin this week. No, I can't do that." So that was what finally stimulated me. Okay, I guess I'm not going to be a golf pro. I'm not going to work for Daniel Libeskind's office. What should I do? So I headed to the West Coast and started exploring Seattle and San Francisco.
Clearly, you ended up in the Bay Area.
I ended up in the Bay Area.
So why a picture of a miner?
So San Francisco at that time was an amazing thing. It's this place where there was gold. People were mining for gold. You had Google was just going out of control. You had Pets.com selling pet food before COVID. These are these little companies trying to do so much, and the economy here was just kept rising and rising. So it seemed like the right place to be. I wanted to come here and get my little piece of California gold. So I moved here in 2000 at the top of the market.
That's there. That's
right
here.
.com bubble. Yeah, exactly. Worked for a firm in the East Bay for 6 years, and started where I am now, which is Kennelly Architecture and Planning. And then finally, I was renting in San Francisco for those first 10 years, and then bought a house in Oakland in 2008 in the Great Recession. So I'm picking
that's a good time to buy a house.
Great moments to move to the Bay Area in the top of the .com bubble, and then recession. So yeah, it's been, I think, good timings.
Is that you panning for gold?
I wish, I hope, maybe when I'm older, I think that could be my future.
Looks like he
It's
scored a
amazing,
lot.
like watching him, he's bending a lot, his knees. I mean, you can't do that at this age.
So tell us, this I'm assuming is some of the work you're proud of?
Correct. So I've worked since 2000 in the Bay Area doing architecture, working on various types of buildings, from restaurant renovations to West Berkeley Bowl to Bentley School to single family houses to multifamily. And I've been doing mostly multifamily for the last, I don't know, probably 16 years. And yeah, these are various projects I've worked on.
Which of these would you say it was the most exciting for you? And tell us what that actually means to an architect.
Yes. I mean, they're all exciting projects. They all have such great clients. All of them have such great opportunities. But I think that the project at Bill Soder Community, which is a 67-unit affordable housing project in San Francisco, it has been like the most. It's one of my more proud projects. It's just amazing clients to start with. Mercy Housing of California. It's providing affordable housing in a really difficult area, right? And Bay Area needs affordable housing, so that was immensely inspiring. This is on 6th Street in Howard in San Francisco, which is a traditionally maybe underserved neighborhood, or when we started this project, there was a building here on the site that had we called it a defenestration project. Had arts kind of jumped out of the window because the building had been burned down for 20 years, and it's kind of an icon on this site. So be able to give it life in this historic neighborhood was pretty exciting. And then also, still give it a modern flair and really fit in well with the neighborhood.
So I'm going to open the room up for questions. I think Diane has a question. Is it Diana?
It's Diana, yes, with an A.
Diana.
Yeah. Actually, I had another question, but going back to the project you were just showing, what is the planning process like in San Francisco now? I noticed it's many stories higher than the original buildings that are around it. What kind of requirements or parameters do they put around housing now?
Yeah, it was a grueling process. I think it was a 6-year project from start to end. So this building, it was in a potentially historic neighborhood at that point. It was the largest grouping of SROs in San Francisco that was still there. So, and it had been surveyed, and there were some qualities of the area that the city felt really strong about retaining in this neighborhood. So we went through an EIR, an environmental impact report, for it because of demolition of the building before it, which was an old brick building. So that was a long process. It also was a San Francisco Redevelopment Agency project, and during this project, redevelopment agencies were shut down by Jerry Brown. So there was that whole sequence of events. It's really a long time. It takes a long time to get things approved in San Francisco.
And was there a special requirement for hiring small workers?
Yeah, workforce housing. Yes, local kids. It does. Yeah,
bring your children to work day.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why I kind of walk through the steps and at least on this project and most of our projects is, architecture is kind of divided into 4 phases: schematic design, design development, construction documents, and construction administration. And, schematic design, we do a lot of sketching, modeling. So to kind of flush out the ideas, understand where we're going. Design development is taking those concepts, developing them into more of a building that you would see, which is more like those middle rendering there. And construction documents is actually when you're putting these concepts onto paper to make details and make a set of drawings that the contractor can build off of. And then, depending on how long, this project was a 2-year construction phase. So it was 2 years of going to the job sites and, reviewing waterproofing details, colors, just everything that goes on in the building. It was really fun because when you went out there, I was like, I knew the building better than anyone else at that point. So it was really good experience. And then all that stuff leads to, the final building, which, houses 67 affordable housing units. Wonderful people in there. Hearing the stories of the people who live there and their past. It's immensely inspiring.
So it sounds from your tone that you're very satisfied with a project like this. However, I can imagine that some of our viewers are wondering, it doesn't sound very sexy. And by that, I mean like, oh, we draw a building, then we build a building. But you just said was 6 years from when someone said, hey, let's do this, to when the project was finished. One, I want to ask you, what's your favorite phase? And two, what would you say to students or people considering architecture as a profession? What's the personality match? Because this seems unique.
Yeah. No, it's you gotta go in with it, the right mindset and be the right personality for sure. I strongly believe that design and creating space is really key to the architectural community and what we're doing. So as we go through all these phases, I really try to think of, when you're doing a detail, you think of it as a design project. When you're dealing with people on sites and how things come together, ultimately it's a design project. And it keeps you going. There are points that are frustrating for sure, and especially in these long projects. You maybe get down a little bit, but ultimately you're creating these buildings that are going to be in the city and contribute to the city in such a powerful way. You want them to turn out well and give them the love that they deserve.
So it's safe to say you're proud of this project.
Yeah, definitely. I think that it was a great project for a great client. So yeah, it was named the top 10 buildings of the decade in San Francisco by John King. We got an AIA National Housing Award for it. So it's also gotten good publicity around. So yeah, I think it was a successful project for this area.
Yeah, I'd say so. Was that your intention when you entered into the profession, that you wanted to? It feels like this is low-income housing. It's unique. It's a bit of a challenge. Did you see yourself heading in that direction, or do you find yourself somewhat surprised by where you are today?
Yeah, I didn't actually think that I'd be doing a lot of multifamily residential projects. In my previous firm, it was where the economy was going in the Bay Area. I was doing a lot of different types of building types, which was really great because you can take lessons from a restaurant into a housing project, or from a hospital renovation to an office. And having those different project types is really inspiring. It allows your mind to continue to think and explore new ideas. And also different project types are much shorter. Like a restaurant remodel is a much shorter process than a big housing project in San Francisco. But yeah, so with the economy change, I ended up doing several multifamily projects at the end of my previous firm. Then the last 15 years at Kennerly, I was hired to do urban infill projects. The first project I worked on with them was a 6-unit project, and it's increasingly gotten larger as we've grown. So it's wonderful. I mean, I think that housing is such a key issue in the Bay Area that it's a way to actually address that problem and try to bring great space to people, and places where you live are really important.
Did the elimination of the redevelopment agencies really hinder the city's ability to easily make housing built, or was there like a transition where now there's just a different way of getting it done?
Yeah, I think San Francisco, I'm not expert at this, but I think San Francisco, when the redevelopment agencies ended, they made kind of follow-up organizations to follow through on the projects that were already being built, like in Trans Bay. The San Francisco Redevelopment Agency became OCII, which stands for something. I don't know, Community Investment and Development or something. And same thing in Mission Bay. An organization kind of came out of it and did it. I don't know for ultimately like new projects if it hindered development, or I'm not really sure. I'm thinking San Francisco, Mayor's Office of Housing took over a lot of the money and funds, I believe. So I think they still have that, and they have all the in lieu fees and assessment fees on new projects. So they're getting money through that, and they're investing that back into neighborhoods. So I think they still have a mechanism to develop affordable housing and housing. It's just maybe you don't have these big projects, big swatches of projects like Trans Bay and Mission Bay as they used to.
So I'd like to switch gears a little bit, since we have the name of this program is A Day in the Life. You've got a slide here.
That's my office.
We're seeing this where there's an office, but there's some other stuff on this page that's pretty interesting. So, for one of the questions that, the whole point of this program was students were telling us, we get the design stuff, we're learning it in school, we know how to do the actual work, but what's it like to actually, what's a day look like? So can you walk us through what, what you used to do and what you're doing today?
So when I lived in San Francisco, when I was renting there, it was a bike ride to work, right? So it was a nice way to commute. Having the opportunity when the Great Recession happened to move to Oakland, and discovering how wonderful Oakland was, I still worked in San Francisco. So I have a commute, and I have to get from Oakland to San Francisco. So I have a couple of ways of doing it. My neighborhood is not adjacent to BART, so I have to get to BART somehow, but I can either take a bike. There's also Trans Bay buses I can take, but as a standard way, I kind of fell into going because of its more consistency with schedule. Was I'd walk from my house a couple blocks to the bus, take a bus downtown to Oakland, hop on BART, take BART from Oakland, downtown of Oakland to San Francisco, and get off 16th Street and walk 15 minutes to my office. So on a good day, when I catch everything right, I could maybe do it in 50 minutes, but on other days it could take up more than an hour. Is not atypical, and it has a cost to it too. So I was spending $13.30 a day on commuting in this model, 2.25 to 2.5 hours a day commuting, and but I was getting a lot of steps in, which is I guess positive. And then you have just at lunchtime, stepping out for lunch. We have a little grocery next to our office, so during lunchtime I would potentially go get that and go get yogurts and whatever it is, burritos at taco truck.
So what are we seeing
today? It's a completely different story. For the last year, I've been working out of my home in our living room, which is the top left-hand corner, which has been good. I have 2 kids and a wife, and luckily they've been immensely they're really motivated in school and let me kind of work alone and don't bother me a lot. So it hasn't been horrible that way. But when you start looking at it in the last year, by not commuting, I've saved almost $3,500, 24 days of my life. All this has come back by just working at home, which, I start thinking about that over 10 years and multiply those by 10, it's a lot of time saved. So I've enjoyed the time working at home. We've work on Teams and other programs to kind of still coordinate with the office. But I ultimately want to get my home office set up in the basement. So that's my next phase, to really make it a really cohesive place for our family to keep going.
So how has working from home changed the way that you work as an architect?
Well, it's interesting because when we started in Shelter in Place, I was working on a project at 11th and Clay in downtown Oakland, a 16-story, 288 units multifamily housing project. and it was in construction. So at that point, we were in the middle of construction administration. So I was still, the job site was open. It kind of slowed down a little bit during COVID, but ultimately I was doing job site visits just like I would normally do, answering questions from the contractor and reviewing submittals from the contractor. So my given that phase of project, it was pretty smooth, just because nothing really changed. I was at the job site or I was at home responding to things, which would have been the same as if I was at the office responding to things. That project is now done, so we've been transitioning to other projects, and we're starting up with the early phases of design and meeting clients and things like that, just kind of developing those relationships. And that has definitely been a transition, just because of the technology, and just you don't have the opportunities that you do to go out after work and socialize with people, or there's definitely different ways of reading people when you're in person versus online.
Sure. I think there's a question. Ali has a question for you there, Brian. Ali, would you unmute yourself?
Thanks so much. Thanks, Brian, for this amazing presentation. My question is regarding the future of housing. So as you mentioned, and that's really true, that's a key issue in Bay Area, but we're not all over the board with the urbanization and the shift in demographics. So my concern here is that when we have this big demand, this huge demand, how can we as a profession advocate for quality of space, quality of housing? That might not be the first priority moving forward. There are lots of challenges, and the main point of the question is, how would you advise a student who might be interested in this area? How can they prepare themselves for this challenging time as somebody who is not just focused on design, but on handling lots of other aspects, dealing with developers or cities. And so that's, I think, one of the biggest challenges, just assuring that the people have a space to live in where they deserve, not just a box of, and as Mike mentioned, the project might not seem, even though if it's one of the top 10 residential projects in San Francisco, there are lots of others that are really not, I don't want to speak, but yeah. So how can we approach?
Yeah, I kind of just answer this idea of equality of space for housing. I think that's is a good one. So I think in the 60s, there was a lot of housing being built in the Bay Area. You got the Western Addition, let's say, they wiped out all these houses for multifamily buildings. And some of those projects are okay, and some of them are not as good. So I think the quality of space, there was a more of a movement just to build, and maybe less about quality. So I think that there's been a shift in the way we think about at least affordable housing away from that. It's just not about providing cheap spaces for people. It's really, I think the city, the developers who are developing these projects in the Bay Area are very educated and very inspiring, and they really want nice projects. So an affordable housing project in San Francisco is designed as well as any other project. It's just it comes down to the talent of the architect, and so you have David Baker doing amazing projects where he's developing affordable housing projects in Hayes Valley, like one of the high demand areas in the area, and they're wonderful projects. So I think it comes down to just keeping that quality spaces, keeping the eye on the prize, that you really are building, like you said, Ali, just you're trying to give good space to the presence in it, and you just have to have that mindset that you keep challenging yourself to continue to strive for the best.
That's fantastic. We're almost out of time, so I did want to pop up this last slide because it gives us a little bit of a flavor of your real life outside of your work. Tell us what we're seeing here.
So that's my family on the left. That's my son, he's 9, me, my wife, and my daughter, who's now 12, no, 11, whatever, one of those two, 11 or 12. Wonderful, wonderful people. They're, people I get to spend so much more time with now. It's at home. The years has passed by, so you can't remember how old they are, but I'm glad that they are part of my life. And then on the right-hand side, things that I'm doing to kind of bridge that gap between architecture as a profession and my hobby. So furniture design on the bottom, I've designed a lot of furniture in our house, home improvements, that's a fence that I recently have done for my backyard. And I have a passion for public transportation. So I have an Instagram account that you guys can follow me at the Stryzek part, where I just take pictures of BART, BART stations, anything BART related. So it's a way for me to keep engaged in the community. And again, it's kind of like this presentation. It gives me the opportunity to think of things in a different way.
Fantastic. Well, Brian, thank you so much for your time this evening, and for those of you that tuned in, and for those of you that are watching on our video channel. Once again, this is A Day in the Life of an Architect, sponsored by AIA East Bay. My name is Mike Wilson, Executive Director of AIA East Bay, and we look forward to seeing you next time on Day in the Life with an Architect. Thank you. Bye now.
Thank you.